My brother didn't wait for me to finish speaking. He just turned to my mother and said, "She's lying again." And that was it. 23 years of being the difficult one, the dramatic one, the one who always made things harder than they needed to be, and it ended with those 3 words. I want to tell you what actually happened, not the version my family rehearsed at the dinner table for years. Mine. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, in a house that looked completely normal from the outside. Beige siding, a birch tree in the front yard that my dad planted the year I was born, a welcome mat that said, "Home is where the heart is." Inside, there were 2 children, me and my brother. I was older by 3 years, which in theory should have meant something. In practice, it meant I was old enough to be blamed for things before he was old enough to explain himself. My brother's name was never something I could say without feeling something complicated. He was charming. Genuinely charming. Not fake, not calculated. Just one of those people who walked into a room and everyone softened a little. Teachers loved him. Coaches loved him. Coaches loved him. My mother loved him in a way she never quite loved me. And I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it was observable, measurable, the kind of thing you notice when you are 9 years old, and you start keeping a mental tally of who gets asked about their day at dinner. My father left when I was 12. He didn't leave dramatically. He just sort of receded, like the tide going out, until one day, the house felt different, and my mother said, quietly, at breakfast, that he wasn't coming back. I cried. My brother said, "It'll be okay." And my mother pulled him into a hug and said, "You're the man of the house now." He was 9. That was the beginning of the shape our family took for the next decade. I don't want to paint my mother as a monster. She worked. She got us to school and kept the fridge stocked and sat through every one of my brother's hockey games in arenas so cold her breath came out in clouds. She did those things, but somewhere along the way, she decided that my brother's happiness was the thing that needed protecting above all else, and I was the variable that kept threatening it. If he and I argued, I had started it. If something went missing, I had moved it. If he was upset, I had said something. She never asked. She assumed, the way you assume when you've already decided. I left for university in Ottawa when I was 18, Carleton, on a partial scholarship for business. I worked part-time at a coffee shop on Elgin Street and paid the rest myself. My mother didn't ask how I was managing. She called me every couple of weeks, mostly to tell me what my brother was up to. He played junior hockey until he was 20, then a knee injury ended it. He came home, took some college courses, got a job at a landscaping company his friend's dad owned. He met a woman. I'll call her my sister-in-law, because that's what she eventually became. And my mother adored her immediately, the way she adored everything connected to him. I graduated, got a job at a mid-sized accounting firm in Toronto, moved into a 1-bedroom in Scarborough, which wasn't glamorous but was mine. I came home for Christmas and Thanksgiving and tried, genuinely tried, to exist in that house without becoming the person they seemed to need me to be. For a few years it worked, or at least it held. The thing that broke it was money. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had lived in a small house in Barrie her whole adult life. She was the kind of woman who saved every dollar she ever made, not out of fear, but out of discipline. She grew up with nothing, married a man who worked at the mill, and by the time she was in her 70s, she had accumulated, quietly and without anyone fully realizing it, a significant amount. The house was paid off. There were GICs, a savings account, some investments she'd made through her credit union over the years. When she passed, 2 months after my 31st birthday in November, quietly, in her sleep, the way she would have wanted, the total came to just over $240,000. She had a will. It was simple, half to my mother. The other half, split equally between me and my brother. My brother called me 3 days after the funeral. He said we should talk about the estate, that things were more complicated than they looked. That there might be debts. I didn't think much of it. Estate stuff takes time. I said okay, keep me posted. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that the conversation happening in Sudbury at that exact moment was a very different one. My brother had told my mother that I had called our grandmother in her final weeks, that I had visited her at the care facility in Barrie, which I had, once, in September, because she was my grandmother and I loved her, and that during that visit, I had convinced her to change the will, that I had manipulated an elderly woman in cognitive decline into giving me more than my share. He had no evidence of this, because it wasn't true, but he said it with the particular confidence of someone who has been believed his entire life without needing evidence. My mother called me the next evening, not to ask, to tell. She said I should be ashamed of myself. She said our grandmother had always been susceptible, that the last year had been hard on her mentally, that she couldn't believe I would do something like this. She said my brother was devastated. She used the word devastated. She used the word devastated 3 times. She did not once ask me what I had actually said or done during that visit. I tried to explain. I said the will was unchanged, that the version being read was the same one our grandmother had filed with her lawyer in 2019, that there was nothing to even contest. My mother said, "That's not what I've been told." I said, "By who?" She said, "You know who." I asked her, directly, "Do you think I would do that?" It was a pause. And then she said, "I think you've always wanted more than what was fair." I didn't yell. I'm not sure why. Maybe because some part of me had been waiting for a sentence like that for 20 years, and it landed less like a shock and more like a confirmation. I said, "Okay," and hung up. I sat in my apartment in Scarborough for a long time that night. The CN Tower was visible from my window if I angled myself right, and I stared at it for a while without really seeing it. I thought about driving up to Sudbury and sitting across from my mother and making her say it to my face again. I thought about calling my brother. I thought about a lot of things. What I actually did was call my grandmother's lawyer. Her name was on the documents I'd received from the estate, a firm in Barrie. I called the next morning and asked, as politely as I could, whether it was possible to get confirmation of the will's original filing date, and whether any amendments had been made in the final year of my grandmother's life. The paralegal I spoke to was professional and careful. She said she couldn't discuss the full details without proper authorization, but she confirmed that the will on file was the one originally drafted in 2019. No amendments, no codicils. She also mentioned, without my asking, that my grandmother had been assessed as mentally competent at the time of her annual review the previous spring. I asked if that was documented. She said yes. I thanked her and asked if I could request a written confirmation of those facts from my own records. She said that was a reasonable request and she'd have something prepared within a week. That week felt very long. My mother did not call. My brother did not call. My sister-in-law sent me a text that said simply, "I hope you can understand how hurtful this has been for our family." I stared at that text for a while, and then put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. What I didn't know, during that week, was what was happening on their end. My brother, it turned out, had done more than make a verbal accusation. He had drafted and sent an email to the estate lawyer, purportedly from me, expressing concern about the fairness of the distribution and asking whether there was a process to contest the will. He had used an email address that was close to mine, but not mine. 1 letter off in the domain. He had written it in a way that was meant to look like I was laying the groundwork to take more than my share. He wanted it on record that I had expressed interest in contesting, so that when he contested, it would look like a response to my aggression rather than the origin of it. I didn't yell. I didn't slam a single door. I just stood there in my kitchen. Saint to the liar herself. She said she had received a concerning message that appeared to come from me, and she wanted to verify before proceeding. I asked her to read it to me. She did. I sat very still while she read. When she finished, I said, "I didn't write that." She said, "I didn't think so." The email address was slightly different, and the writing style didn't match your earlier communication. She paused. "I flagged this internally. I want you to know that." I asked her what the next steps were. She said she would document the discrepancy and that if this were to proceed in any formal direction, the fraudulent email would be relevant. She said she'd recommend I keep records of everything. I already was. I had saved my mother's voicemail from the night she called me. I had screenshotted my sister-in-law's text. I had the written confirmation from the paralegal about the will's filing date and my grandmother's competency assessment. And now, I had a lawyer who had independently flagged a forged email. I didn't yell. I didn't slam a single door. I told my aunt, instead, my mother's younger sister, who lived in Hamilton and had always been the person in the family who said what other people were thinking. I told her everything, not emotionally, just factually, in the order it happened. There was a long silence when I finished. Then my aunt said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "My whole life, I think. This is just the first time there was a document trail." She laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true and absurd at the same time. She said she'd always noticed. She said she was sorry she hadn't said anything sooner. I told her it wasn't her job to fix it. What happened next I could not have orchestrated if I'd tried. My aunt, without telling me she was going to, called my mother. She called her on a Sunday afternoon, when my brother and his wife happened to be there for lunch. The usual Sunday lunch that had happened at my mother's house for years. The one I had stopped being invited to around the time the inheritance conversation started. My aunt called and asked my mother, on speakerphone, to explain what had happened with the will. My mother told the same story. I had visited. I had influenced. It wasn't right. My aunt said, "Did you ask her about it directly?" My mother said she didn't need to, that my brother had been very clear. My aunt said, "The lawyer's office flagged a forged email. Did you know that?" Silence. My aunt said the email was sent from an address that wasn't her real one. One letter different. The lawyer herself called your daughter to verify because something felt wrong. More silence. My aunt said, "I'm going to send you the documentation right now. I want you to look at it while I'm on the phone." She had asked me, 2 days earlier, if she could have copies of everything I'd gathered. I had sent them. She forwarded them to my mother in real time, while they were all sitting around that table. I wasn't there, but my aunt told me what happened next. My brother said the email address thing was a coincidence, that he didn't know anything about any email. My mother pulled up the documents on her tablet. She looked at the paralegal's written confirmation, the will filed in 2019, the competency assessment from the spring. She looked at the email the lawyer had flagged with the almost but not quite right address. She looked at the timestamp. The timestamp on the forged email was from a date my brother could account for. He had been at a work event. He'd mentioned it in a group family chat weeks earlier. The kind of detail no one would have thought to use as an alibi. The kind of detail that became one. My mother didn't say anything for a long time. My brother said, "Mom, you know how she is." And my aunt told me that my mother looked at him, really looked at him, and said quietly, "I actually don't think I do." I was in my apartment when my aunt called to tell me. I was making dinner. Pasta, nothing special, the kind of thing you make when you're tired and not expecting anything significant to happen. My aunt said, "You should call your mother." I said, "Is she ready to talk?" My aunt said, "I think she's ready to listen, which might be more important." I called. My mother answered on the second ring, which surprised me. She usually let it go to voicemail. She didn't apologize right away. I didn't expect her to. She said, "I need you to tell me what actually happened when you visited Grandma." And I did. I told her about the afternoon in September. The way the care home smelled like institutional coffee and floor cleaner. The way my grandmother had held my hand and told me she was proud of how I'd turned out. The conversation we'd had about nothing in particular. Her garden, my job, a book she'd been trying to finish. No conversation about money. No conversation about the will. Just two people who loved each other spending an afternoon together. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I should have asked you." I said, "Yes." She said, "I've been doing this your whole life, haven't I?" It wasn't a question. I didn't answer it like one. I just said, "It would have been nice if someone had asked." The estate was distributed according to the will, the original, unchanged one, filed in 2019. I received my share, deposited into my account on a Tuesday in February, when the trees outside my window were bare, and the sky was that particular flat gray that Toronto gets in winter. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired mostly, and a little sad. My brother didn't contest. His lawyer, apparently, had advised him against it once the forged email was formally documented. There were no criminal charges. My mother didn't want that, and honestly, neither did I. What I wanted was for it to be over. My relationship with my mother is different now. Not fixed. I don't think fixed is the right word for something that was built a certain way for 30 years. But different. She calls me more than she used to. She asks actual questions and waits for the actual answers. Last Thanksgiving, she came to Toronto instead of the other way around, and we ate takeout pho on my couch and watched a movie, and she fell asleep before the ending, and I didn't wake her up. My brother and I haven't spoken since February. That might change. It might not. I've stopped trying to predict it. What I know is this. For most of my life, I was the difficult one. The one who made things complicated. The one who, according to everyone who had already decided, was always looking for more than her share. It turned out the documentation disagreed. There's a version of this story where I'm bitter, where I replay that phone call with my mother. I think you've always wanted more than what was fair, and let it harden into something I carry everywhere. I understand that version. I just don't live there anymore. What I've come to believe, sitting with all of it, is that the way things unfolded wasn't luck. It was cause and effect, playing out slowly, the way it usually does. My brother spent years building a reputation for being believed without evidence. That worked, until the one time he needed to manufacture evidence, and the evidence itself gave him away. He sent that email because he was confident. And that confidence, the same thing that had protected him his whole life, is exactly what undid him. He didn't think he needed to be careful. He had never had to be. I think about that a lot, not with satisfaction, exactly, but with something like clarity. The choices we make accumulate. The shortcuts we take, the people we're willing to use, the corners we cut because we've gotten away with it before. They don't disappear. They sit there, quiet, until the moment they don't. And on my side of it, I had documentation because I had done nothing wrong and hadn't been afraid to ask questions. I called the lawyer because I trusted what I knew to be true. I kept records not out of suspicion, but out of habit. The kind of habit you build when you've spent a long time being the one nobody automatically believes. There's a strange kind of discipline that comes from never being given the benefit of the doubt. You learn to be precise. You learn to verify. You learn that the truth is worth protecting, even when it feels like no one is interested in it. That's the part of this I want to hold on to, not the inheritance, not the outcome with my mother, not even the vindication, though I'd be lying if I said that didn't matter. What I want to hold on to is that when it counted, I knew what was right and I did it anyway. I didn't forge anything. I didn't yell. I just did my kitchen. I visited my grandmother because I loved her. And I have to be okay with the fact that the only record of that afternoon is the one I carry. I think that's what integrity actually is, not a quality you perform when people are watching, but the thing that stays consistent when you're not sure anyone will ever know the difference. My brother made a different choice. My mother, for most of my life, made a different choice too. And my aunt, the one who picked up the phone on a Sunday afternoon and said what needed to be said, she made a choice as well. These things are not separate from who we are. They are who we are. I'm 32 now. I live in Toronto, and I make my own decisions, and I know exactly what I have and what I earned. My grandmother would have appreciated that, I think. She was a woman who kept her own records too.